Hi guys, Samantha from Jessama Tutorials here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to create faux Amazonite. So here is a real piece that I have for reference, and so basically this is what we're going to try to imitate. So the most important thing for this project is going to be the clay that we're using. I would recommend either using a powder color, and this is transparent aqua or aqua translucent, as you can see there, and this gives us basically the exact color that we want. If you don't happen to have this color of powder, you can always mix powder translucent with a green alcohol ink. However, you're going to have to mess with that because you're going to need to try to get that kind of greenish blue color. Okay, so basically all we're going to do is we're going to chop off a block of this. Now, a nice thing about this technique is that we don't need to condition the powder, and if any of you have worked with powder, you'll know that it can be a bit finicky when you try to condition it. It is quite brittle, even if it is fresh. This is a pretty fresh block. I can squish it and it will move. But if I was to roll this through the pasta machine, it would probably crumble. So that's just normal with powder. So I've just cut it into strips like this to make it easier for me. And then after I've done that, I'm just going to lay them next to each other. And I'm just going to start chopping. And just break those pieces up so they're not all sticking together, and I will probably chop it one last time. Okay, now bear in mind this technique also can be used with other brands of polymer clay, such as Polymer translucent. However, it's not going to look as translucent. It's going to not have that quartz effect. So I'd highly recommend using powder, but if you can't get hold of powder, you can always play around with other translucent brands. Now I'm actually going to not use my tissue blade again, and I'm actually going to go in here, and I'm using my fingers to break them apart. And as you can see here, because it's not conditioned, it's very easy to do that, and that will give some of the pieces more of an organic edge. Okay, so I'll just continue doing that until I'm happy. You don't want them all to be the same size, you want some small, some large, and that way you'll get a more organic effect. Okay, and there we go. Now I am going to chop this one last time, just very quickly, just to get some pieces a little smaller. Because in general, Amazonite has pretty small sections. If you look at something like quartz or calcite, it has larger areas of colour, so you want to chop the Amazonite pieces quite fine. Okay. Now what I recommend doing to avoid it being messy is to bring over a plastic bag. And we're going to be working with two colours of acrylic paint. I'm going to be using pure white, and I'm also going to be using some pearl white. And if you look at our original stone, you can see that it kind of has a little bit of a shimmer in there, and so that's why I want to use some pearl white. Now I don't want to use all pearl white because it would come across as too metallic. I only want a little bit, and I actually need to remember to shake this, because otherwise the particles don't distribute properly. There you go. And all you're going to do is you're just going to squirt a bit of that paint into your bag. Not a lot, just a bit. Same with the white. Okay. Then grab some of your clay and pop that in, and then you can squirt a little bit more in. And this just basically, it might use a little bit more paint than if you did this by hand, so if you're okay with doing it by hand, then by all means do that. But if you are, if you want to keep your hands clean for the most part, this is a very nice way to keep it clean. and your work surface as well. It just takes out the mess of this technique. And it also means that you generally get a better distribution of paint. So now make sure when you close this that you have a decent amount of air still left in here. So I'm going to close, and then I'm actually going to blow to get this as big as I can, and then close. So you have this nice bag to work with. And I just want you to shake your clay around like so. And this is going to distribute that paint nicely all over the pieces. Okay, now let's open that up and have a look. And if you look inside, you can see there that it's been pretty well distributed. So now what I want to do is I want to get it out of this bag because I don't want it really drying in there. Okay, and I'm just going to put it onto a separate tile so that it's not going to be touching my workspace. And that way I can spread it out to dry and it's not in my way if I wanted to do some other projects in the meantime while I was waiting for this. Can I just double check that you haven't had too many sticking inside there? Hopefully that you can see there are some that have stuck. So just take like a wooden stick or skewer and just poke that around and try to get it out. And basically once you've got it all out, just move it around like this so that it's kind of flat, so that it will dry quicker. It will dry much quicker than if you just molded it into a clump. Okay, and then when this is dry, we will move on to the next step. Okay, now this is mostly dry. It's not completely dry. You can wait until it is, but I'm impatient and so I couldn't wait that long. So I'm just going to move that to the side, and I'm actually going to bring this onto my proper tile. And I am wearing gloves so that I don't get the paint all over myself. So I apologise, I know that the gloves irritate you guys, but I don't want the paint on myself. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm trying to arrange it into a situation where I can flatten it out into a sheet. I don't want to press it into a cane-like block because I want to cut out pieces from it instead of taking slices and cutting from those. So I'm trying to press this into a sheet. Now it's going to definitely be more compact than I would like right now, but we will roll it out and it will become thinner once we start pressing it together. So just continue working it. You can even use a hairdryer to help that paint dry, because right now, because it's a little wet, it's having a little bit of trouble sticking together. So if you are having that sort of trouble, you can always just use a hairdryer to start the drying process. And then once I've got it kind of dry, then I will move on to flattening it out and getting rid of all of these little grooves. Okay, so I've dried it. And it's going to be sticky until we bake it, essentially, because powder doesn't tend to like water. It kind of gets sticky when you expose it to water, which is what acrylic has in it. So just keep in mind there is definitely going to be a little sticky. That is normal. Okay, now I can take off my gloves now. I've sandwiched it between two pieces of paper, and what I plan to do now is I plan to start burnishing it quite aggressively to get all those pieces to blend together. Now keep in mind that the paint will probably end up sticking quite a bit to the paper. You can see there that it will stick and some of the clay will lift up. That's fine, mustn't worry too much about that. Just bear in mind that that will happen. So you want to lift up your sheet of clay from the paper before you actually cut out your pieces, otherwise you're going to find that they rip and tear. And that's not something that you want. Okay. Now I'm going to bring over a roller, and I'm actually going to start rolling this. I just want to make sure that this is perfectly clean. Okay, and it's actually good if my roller's a little wet because then the clay's not going to stick to it. I'm doing this because I want to first off bind these pieces all together, and I also want to stretch this sheet out a bit. And you can see that I have clay sticking to the roller. That's normal. Every once in a while take a rag, clean that off, and then come back and start again. And when you start to see it sticking again, wipe and start rolling again. And just get it to probably around, let's say 4 millimeters thick. That's a good thickness. Let's see how thick that is now. That probably is actually quite a good spot to put it at. And so now I'm going to bring over another piece of plain printing paper so that I can burnish this. Okay. And again, you can see that's going to stick. And now I'm going to attempt to lift up this part from the paper. Again, bearing in mind that it is going to be quite sticky. So go slow and steady with it. And I'm using a blunt knife because I don't want to accidentally slip and cut myself. So if you have any blunt knives, this is a good use for it. And just continue doing that until you get your piece off. And there we go, that actually came off pretty well. Okay. And I'm actually going to stick this down to a tile. I don't usually recommend cutting out your pieces from the tile, but this is one of those cases where I would recommend putting it onto your tile and actually giving it a roll with your roller. And something that can also help prevent your roller from sticking is putting a wet rag over the top of your piece and rolling. Since we want to get a nice smooth surface, and we can't really do that with the paper, so we can do that with a rag. It's going to give a little bit of a texture, but we're going to need to sand this quite thoroughly to remove the excess paint. And although it will stick a little bit, it's going to leave a much better flat texture than if we had used a piece of paper. Alright, so now select some cutters that you want. And I'm going to be using my Pebble earring cutters, and I've got a few different types, so I'll get those out quickly. Okay, and there's what I've planned. I want to use a donut cutter, and I also want to use make an earring pair to go with it. So I'll put this to the side, and I'm going to just gently start cutting with my donut cutter. And just making sure that I'm getting through, and because there's a circle you can actually spin it to get a really clean cut. Then I'm going to bring these ones in, and I'm going to make a cut each with those. There we go. Just going to remove as much of the excess as possible, put that to the side. We will use that in a moment because I don't like wasting stuff. Okay, and I'm going to take my blade again, and I'm going to shimmy these up, place those onto a piece of paper, Now, because we're going to be doing a lot of sanding anyway, I wouldn't worry about tidying these up too much. I would just put them onto a piece of plain printing paper all ready to go into the oven. Now, they will stick a little bit to the paper, but so long as we don't burnish them onto it, they won't stick in such a way that we won't be able to peel them off once they're baked. Okay, and that does look like a mess right now, but as always with this technique, it will look really nice once we have done the finishing sand. Okay, now I'm going to bring over these leftovers, and I don't want to waste them. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly chop them up a little bit. And now this isn't going to look as good as our first bunch because it is made out of leftovers. It's been contorted into ways that it shouldn't really be pressed into. But it's a nice way to use the leftovers. So that you can see kind of how that looks. Just take that, press that together. And then I'm going to roll. And hopefully we'll be able to get out like 2 more earring pairs from this. And now you might be thinking that this clay is a little too light for the Amazonite, because if you look here, it is quite light. Now bear in mind that when you're working with translucent, more often than not, it is actually going to get darker once you bake it. And I've done a test bake with this and it gets down to just the right colour for Amazonite. So whenever you're working with translucent and you colour it, make sure you do a little test bake before you actually make your piece, because sometimes, most of the time, there is quite a significant colour change after it has been baked. So just bear that in mind. Okay, so there we go, we've got another little earring pair out of that. Shimmy those up, pop them down. And all these little excess bits and pieces can all get tidied up later on once they come out of the oven. For now, we don't want to be messing with them too much. If you find any imperfections, like there's this little bit of, I think it's metal leaf on the donut, I'm just going to quickly cut that off. But other than that, I would just recommend popping this straight into the oven, baking it, and once it has finished baking, we're going to be doing a fairly major sanding job with these to get them to clear up and look really nice. Okay, so I've just got them out of the oven and I've cooled them off. And now keep in mind that until they're cool, that colour change is not going to happen. So this is the true colour of what it will look like, but just bear in mind that it will look lighter than this after it comes out the oven. So there you can see there. You'll get a better look on the tile later on. So now what we want to do is we want to sand these. So I'm going to start with a 360 grit, and I'm going to work my way up to a 1200 grit. And all we want to do is we want to sand this so that we remove the top layer of paint, and so that we get a nice, clean, smooth finish. It will feel quite bumpy in the beginning, but once you start sanding, you'll remove all of those bumps. So I just want to quickly finish this part here. I'm not sure if you can see there, but that has a much clearer pattern distinction over here than it does around here. So hopefully you can see there. I'll show you on the tile in a little while, but basically you want to start with a 360, go up to a 400, then 800, then a 1200, and sand all of them like that. You want to sand the sides, you want to sand the front and the back of all of these pieces, and then when that's done, I will show you what to do next. Okay, and here we are. Now that they have been sanded with the wet dry sandpaper, now you can see that the pattern really looks quite nice, and hopefully the camera is able to pick it up. But when I direct it around, hopefully you can see that there is some sparkle to it, which is quite nice. Now again, it's not perfect as far as the same colour goes. You could add a little bit of blue ochre ink or blue powder to it, but I'm trying to make the project simple, so I don't want to add in too many complicated things such as colour recipes. However, Amazonite does vary in colour, so this is a pretty good replication of the colour. Now to get it to an even higher shine, I want to use some polishing papers, and these are finer grits. So I'm going to start with a 600 and I'm going to go all the way up to an 8000 grit. And essentially you do the exact same as you were doing before. You start sanding the front, the sides and the back. And this should smooth it out, give it a nice satin sheen. And then after we have finished sanding with these polishing papers, we can move on to buffing it and giving it a really nice shine. Now something I do want to point out while I'm doing this is since we put these pieces together and we didn't roll it out or take too much time to smooth out any imperfections, you're going to find that there are cracks in between each of the pieces, very fine fissures that are visible once you buff this. That is something that I want, because if you look at stones, they generally have those fissures visible unless they are when you're looking at veined stones such as quartz or turquoise, they will have those fissures in between where the veins are, and so I find that actually adds a more realistic look rather than not having those fissures. So if you do feel little bumps across the surface of your piece, don't stress. It's something that will add to the actual realism of the piece, because most pieces of stone are not completely smooth and don't have a completely smooth finish. Like even if you look at this one, I'm not sure if the camera's going to be able to pick it up, but hopefully you can see there that although it's got a really nice shine to it, there are areas where you have these imperfections. Like you can see there, there is an imperfection there. So that is why I want those visible when I make the imitation. Okay, so now that they're sanded, we are going to buff them. Now you could put a gloss varnish on them or resin if you wanted to, but again, as I was talking about before, that would hide the veins. And also I find that getting resin onto these sorts of pieces where they've kind of got a bit of a dome to them can be very difficult. So I wouldn't really recommend putting resin on. I generally go for adding some Renaissance wax to the front and back and then giving it a nice buff. And I will add that Renaissance wax to all of my pieces, let it dry for like a minute or two, and then we can move on to buffing them. Okay, and now we're going to move on to buffing. So I'm using a Dremel 3000. You can buff them by hand by rubbing them against a piece of cloth quite vigorously, but generally a Dremel or any rotary tool with a nice soft buffing wheel will do the trick best. And there we go. You can see how that has really shone up. So you can see an example here. So I'm going to continue buffing up these 4 pieces and then we can get on to assembly. Okay. So the next step is going to be to drill them. And so these are going to be the tops of these ones and tops of these ones will be there as well. So all you do is you take a drill, and this is a push drill. And I just like to drill a little bit to get a nook for my drill to sit in, and then I push down and start drilling. Okay, and it will come out the other side. This is a very nice way to drill because it doesn't require an automatic drill, which can be a little on the dangerous side. But it still goes pretty quickly. Okay, and I will repeat with these other 3. The donut, you could just loop a cord through the hole. Okay, and now the next step is going to be to assemble them. Now for these ones, I wanted to try out something. I wanted to put these little loops up here and then attach my earring wire. Whereas these ones, I'm just going to go with the general, just pop a loop, earring wire in. So we'll see which one I like the best. And let me know in the comments which one you like the best. So I'm just going to open up a jump ring, fit that through, then grab that loop And I generally buy all of my findings from Fire Mountain Gems, if you are wondering where to get things like this. Find that loop. And actually, I need to grab this and turn this loop around a touch. There we go. Then I can attach it. Like so. And there we go. You can decide for yourself if you like that. I'm going to string this one and these two as well now. Okay, and there we go. So that is basically it for this tutorial. So I quite like how this turned out. You could add a little bit of blue powder, as I said before, to get a slightly more blue effect in the Amazonite. But this powder that I chose, the colour works pretty well. It's a pretty good match to create Amazonite. I actually really like that I added the pearl white in with the white clay, because it probably is very hard to pick up on the camera. But if you twist it around, it really has a very interesting sparkle to it, and it creates the same sort of effect that this Amazonite has, which is really nice. Also, this is the same sort of technique that I used to create rose quartz, so if you haven't already looked at my rose quartz tutorial, check it out. I will link it in the links below, as that's another stone that has a very similar patterning to the Amazonite, so be sure to check that out if you are interested in creating faux rose quartz. And if you enjoyed this tutorial, please do let me know in the comments, and if you would like to support this channel so that I can continue creating videos like this one, please do consider becoming a patron. I have a link to that in the description below this video as well. You get exclusive tutorials on there every single month. You also have quite a large backlog, so it's definitely worth the membership fee, and it also helps support the channel. And as always, I will see you in the next tutorial. Bye for now.